Hello and welcome to the Conductors podcast. We are Fabian, that's me, Louise,
Hi.
Harry,
Hello.
and Ali.
Greetings.
This is our first podcast and we're going to be talking about Agar Town. What was it? Well, Agar Town was an area of Victorian London, famed for its perceived status as a slum. As a result of this, it was demolished by the Midland Railways Company to make way for St Pancras railway station. The area which became Agar Town was originally the property of William Agar, who was a wealthy lawyer. When he died, his widow, Louise, who was the niece of the Earl of Shrewsbury, the one who owned Alton Towers, leased out the plots of land. These plots were mostly leased to the city's working class, who built up their own homes. They were affordable leases and lasted for 21 years. The area was claimed to be a slum with no drainage, rampant disease, an Irish population, poor quality buildings, and just general disgusting, cramped conditions. Many articles were written which exaggerated the poor state of the area. An article in Dickens's Household Words magazine claimed that the area was nothing more than an Irish slum. Most of these articles are in fact part of a general campaign of more socially conscious writers who hope to create more awareness for the state of the working class housing in London. Despite all of these reports, when looking further into historical record, it becomes clear that Agar Town did not deserve its slum status. St Pancras Old Church vestry reports confirm that the housing quality was not bad and that most of the buildings were not cottages and were in fact family homes. An 1851 report from the Board of Health shows that rates of disease were relatively low, and the census results show that hardly anyone living in Agar Town had been born in Ireland. Furthermore, most of the people who lived in Agar Town were moderately successful and were generally employed in the local industries such as piano making. Hardly anyone in Agar Town claimed poor relief or were put into poorhouses, and though it was still a relatively poor town, however, it was not a slum. Many of the occupants were actually doing perfectly fine. In the 1850s, ownership of Agar Town was passed to the local church commissioners, who later sold it to the Midland Railways, a railway company who were very successful but needed far more room to expand and gain more wealth and customers. They got the Midland Railways Bill passed in Parliament in 1863, which gave them the right to level the area. The destruction of Agar Town by the Midland Railways Company was complete by 1866, and they had destroyed 3,000 houses and built up St Pancras railway station and its massive goods yards, which it needed. These goods yards stored all the coal that the trains needed and all the packages and parcels and whatnot that would be delivered between areas. They legitimized all of this destruction with the many reports which claimed that Agar Town was a depraved slum. The people who lived in Agar Town were simply just dispersed. Many of them ended up homeless as a result of this. The housing situation for the working poor was abysmal in London, and there was hardly anywhere they could go. Somers Town was also destroyed to make way for St Pancras. Somers Town was home to many refugees, mostly French Catholics who had fled the French Revolution. The medieval St Pancras Old Church was impacted by the construction of St Pancras. The bodies from its extensive graveyard had to be dumped in pits elsewhere, and the gravestones were arranged around the tree in the churchyard. This was carried out by the young Thomas Hardy, the writer of Far from the Madding Crowd and Tess and the D'Urbervilles. The graves wrapped round the tree is an incredible sight, but unfortunately the tree fell down last year. I have a personal connection to Agar Town. My great-great-great-great-grandparents, Diana and Joseph Lawrence, lived in the Roscommon cottages on Cambridge Crescent in Agar Town. This can be seen in the 1851 census. Joseph, much befitting his name, was a carpenter like a lot of the inhabitants of Agar Town. They moved to Middlesex Street, which was demolished to make way for warehouses which stored all the goods being offloaded at St Pancras. This was later demolished, and the Francis Crick Institute sits in its place now. The case of Agar Town shows us how Victorian railway companies were granted the ability to pulverise working class areas for their own expansion and enrichment. These kind of injustices were rife in Victorian society. Workers were exploited, child labour was common, and the franchise was incredibly limited. This also shows us how corruption during this period was immense. Corporations had the power to affect legislation for their own benefit. Much change was yet to come in this area. Furthermore, the way that the reports which called Agar Town a slum were used to legitimise its destruction show how something which is good meaning can be always used for ill. This is also a reminder that all innovation and all changes do inevitably come with a price. Everything has consequences, and many people have suffered now for the things which we take for granted.
Were the people paid off, or were they just like evicted?
As far as I can tell, they were literally just evicted and told to go away. Many of them ended up in Southwark and the surrounding areas in London, just poor and destitute and homeless.
Well, was it the government evicting them then, or was it the railway company? Because was there anyone they could go to and be like, look what happened?
I'm afraid not. They had passed the Midland Railway Bill, which gave the company just the ability to level the area. So, the government were fully compliant. They absolutely accepted that they had the right to just destroy people's homes. So yeah, the company just destroyed their homes and told them to go elsewhere.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Was it labelled as a slum before the railways decided they wanted it?
Yes, yeah. That was obviously done by people who wanted to just the situation for working class housing at the time was abysmal. So there were a lot of people writing these reports which said that these areas are slums, they need to be improved, we need to put money into this, we need to change things, the government needs to step in, and obviously the railways company said, we can just use this as propaganda. So it was people were calling it a slum before the railways took over it.
I guess due to the lack of any social government bills being passed, they couldn't really claim that they had any rights of the people who got evicted from Agar Town because of basic social conditions back in the Victorian times. I guess that is one of the reasons why we wouldn't see things like this nowadays.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There are of course protections and many laws passed to stop this.
Do you know much about why everyone had beef with the Irish? Why were they so upset about them?
Well, obviously, the Irish were foreigners and were kind of, seen as very dirty and drunk and just,
Just like them, really.
people didn't like them and, seen as quite disorderly and violent.
Yes, yeah.
Still are.
It's very stereotypical.
Yes, yeah. There was a lot of stereotyping.
Was the eviction of all the people in Agar Town worth it because of all the financial benefit that St Pancras station has brought to the UK?
I don't know a lot about it, but I think definitely not, because there can't be, despite how useful we see St Pancras today, there was still do you know how many people? You probably said, but thousands of people would have been evicted. It's thousands of people's lives, and I don't know. It's difficult to compare that to an amount of money. I think
there were about 104,000 people living in Agar Town, and it was. And not only did they have to be removed, sent elsewhere, also the inhabitants of Somers Town as well, and so yes, it was a devastating thing.
It's a lot of people involved, really.
Yeah.
So just want to ask, did they build the railways just solely for the purpose of evicting people? And did this happen to any other places where they used railways to evict people?
No, the railways were not built with the sole purpose of removing working class people. They were built to improve the profits of the railway companies, and obviously at the price of all these communities. And yes, this type of thing happened a lot. In fact, King's Cross, which is next to St Pancras, was a hospital for the treatment of smallpox, was actually situated on the site and then that had to be destroyed to make way for King's Cross. So yes, this type of thing happened quite a lot, unfortunately.
That's actually very interesting to hear that it didn't happen once, it happened more than once.
I find it quite interesting thinking about it in terms of like London or a big city, because if you think about it, when like in the country and most of the UK, it wouldn't have been a drastic thing putting in stations and things like that, because there would have been space for it. But in London, it was packed full.
Yeah.
And like you look at, like, if you walk around modern London today, it's such a different space than it used to be. And I think that's really fascinating. Yeah,
that is true. I mean, when we think of the thing about St Pancras is when we see it today, we just see, there's the station, which is beautiful. It's an amazing station, just a prime example of Victorian neo-Gothic architecture. We see it, and it's massive, but the thing is, it would have been even bigger back then because they needed so much space to store all the coal that was needed for the trains and all of the goods that would have been transported by the trains. So, the land that St Pancras took up would have been even bigger back then. So, yeah, it's mad. It's insane to think of how much they needed to destroy just to build these things.
Like, if you go to the area of King's Cross and St Pancras Station, you would never have thought that there was a big slum just that used to be there.
Wasn't a slum.
well, that's what it got described as, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other areas in London at the time, which were proper slums, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's crazy to think how over a period of 200 years that an area has changed so much, which is, I think is pretty cool.
The thing about it is that before there was Agar Town, there was Elm Lodge, which is where the Agars lived. So before that before the town, there was it was just fields essentially owned by this very wealthy lawyer. So it went from a private residence to a pretty big town with 100,000 inhabitants to a massive railway station in the space of 30 years, around that, which is insane to think. This has been the Conductors podcast. Thank you ever so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.